Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Business Insights room. Every Thursday, Tim Sullivan and I, Maya Matsuoka, lead a discussion looking for insights, developments, and new opportunities for the business in Japan. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions. So if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region.
It's 2 minutes past 8 o'clock. It's the time when we open the room. And today we've got Colin Savage, or Savage. Colin, please let me know if I mispronounce your family name.
You got them both right. You said the one that I love to hear, which is the French version, and then you said the one that everyone says, which is the English way. So good stuff.
Thank you. Well, I like the French version very much too.
So do I.
Yes. So, Colin, we have been connected on LinkedIn for quite some time, and we have communicated for a while. And Colin, I'm just trying to let other people know how we got in touch. And we communicated indeed for a while on LinkedIn, and Colin and Tim have a few things in common. Their background is in anthropology. Of course, their career paths have been different, as happens with two different people. But, there is also one more thing in common. As Tim mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, Tim came back to Japan several years ago, and now he's based in Atami, and Colin is actually considering coming back to Japan in the near future. Today's the title of today's room is why EU and Japan need each other now, and we're going to talk about this. Of course, I believe that quite a few people here in the audience will have something to add, probably to ask, and share their observations. So please feel free to join us at any time. We'll be happy to bring you up on stage. Raise your hand. Just to let you know that Colin is, he's got a rich career as an advisor, a business developer, an innovator, marketer, sales leader, and strategist. I have pinned the link to his LinkedIn profile here on top of the room. So if you're curious, you can go there to his profile and have a better look at it. It's really very well developed. Please follow him, give him a follow on LinkedIn and here on Clubhouse as well, and reach out to him so that you can communicate later. So, Colin, let's start. I think I can ask you a question first. Why are we talking about this topic today? Why you and Japan need each other today or now?
I thank you so much, Maya, and again, thanks Tim and Maya for both having me today. I had this, so over the weekend, I'm a planning kind of person. So, at various moments over the weekend, I thought like, okay, well, I can be really methodical about this, and I can say why I want to go to Japan and why I need it and why Japan wants me to come or people like me to come and why they need me. And then this morning I woke up and it's mid-April and it was minus 15 degrees and there was 30 centimeters of snow on the ground. And so one of the things I thought right away was I need Japan because I need to get out of Canadian winter, which is the first thing. But joking aside, there's kind of, I think probably the way that I laid it out is maybe the best way to go about it, at least from my perspective. So as people will see from my background, and thanks for sharing it, Maya, I spent some of my earlier adult, working years in Japan, and it was just such a mixed but mostly wonderful experience that I probably have a little bit of nostalgia as an element of why I want to go back to Japan. But I also see, if you're like me and you came from somewhere else, you made Japan home and then you left, that was kind of a common thing, and it maybe still is, that Japan is sort of a place where you go when you're just starting out in your working life. You teach English or you do an internship, or you might even be a scholarship university student or something. You spend 3 years or so there, and then you leave to go back home. And you kind of say goodbye to Japan, thank you so much, and then you continue on with your life. But I don't know many people that have successfully kind of put Japan in a box and never thought about it again. And so I think there's the real opportunity is for those of us that have had that experience, that went there when we were younger, saw what it was like, gained a lot, and then went away, coming back there's a lot that we can offer, and that what we offer gives us the opportunity. And I know from talking to, and it probably isn't just me, I'm sure I'm not that amazing of a person, but I get a lot of requests. I get a lot of asks from executive search companies, recruiters, even companies I worked with in the past saying, we have this gap. We don't have a lot of sort of middle-aged, established, experienced, skillful foreigners who know the country, know the culture, know the language that are here. And we really need them. And we need them because we need what they can do and how they can fit into our society and how we do things, but also what they can bring from abroad. So, the whole idea of you go there when you're young, you spend a few years and then you leave and there's nothing to be added or, excuse me, shared back again is I think a really missed opportunity. So for me, that's what I'm kind of looking for. I've gained a lot since I've left. And I think the fact that I have the foundation of what I understand Japan to be, maybe if it is a little bit nostalgic, and the station or the stage I am in my life, in my career, if I went back to Japan, there'd be a lot of value that I could deliver to companies that are looking for a little bit of a different but common perspective. And to be really quick on the flip side, we read in the news and we hear from our friends, whether they're in Japan or otherwise, there is a real gap. There's a skill gap. There's a leadership gap. There's even just a perspective gap in Japan right now that isn't being filled. And if Japan is going to be able to continue to compete, or at least start to compete in the forefront again, they're going to need a really unique group of people that have that foundation, whether it's they live there for a few years or their partner is Japanese or they've had an affinity with the country for a long time. And now when they're in their 40s, 50s, or even later, they want to go back to Japan and make it home. Contribute to the country that gave them a lot when they were younger or has generated some interest and desire from them to continue to be connected to it. There's all the other economic and social reasons and everything else, but I think those are the kind of two that I would focus on and that are really kind of resonating with myself. And I know Maya and Tim, we both talked recently about some more specific personal reasons. And maybe somewhat selfish, but I guess the last one I'll add before I hand this back to you and maybe some questions from the audience is I kind of liked almost living like in a little bubble, if I can call it that. The ability to, sort of pursue what I wanted to, my interests, my hobbies, whatnot, focus on my job, focus on my family, and kind of be left to my own devices. Japan really offered me that. And I'm an active guy. I'm involved in lots of boards and associations and other things, but it is also kind of nice to be, when you want, sort of on your own in your little bubble and just do what you feel you need to do and enjoy life. And I think Japan has a wonderful sort of atmosphere and milieu for that. They really afford that to you. As long as you do what you're supposed to do, the rest of it is open. So I guess that's what I'll leave for now, Maya and Tim, unless you guys had any specific questions or maybe something I said just kind of struck the wrong chord.
No, I thank you so much. And I like how you framed everything. The idea, many people come here for 2, 3, 4 years and then they go back. But it's hard to get Japan. I'm going to preface this by saying certain people, and many of them are in the audience, just have a natural personality that gravitates to Japan and they feel comfortable here. Not everybody. That's my point. There's some people, it's just not for them, right? And so I think that if you have that personality, there's going to be that nostalgia, for Japan. And I think that's a good thing, but I also feel like aside from the professional side of life, for me, it's not a surprise, but the biggest impact of coming back was reconnecting. And I was connected, but socializing again with old friends, people I've known for 40 plus years. Right. And it was just so, I don't know how it's so fulfilling to spend time with them again and have fun with them. And I had forgotten how much fun we used to have together. And this is a circle of like 10, 15 friends, right? Mm. And then the other point for me was that I'm blessed because I have really good relationship with my in-laws. Like I get along with them really well. And I think that's also an important point about the attractiveness. And then the other point on a more practical level, again, you're Canadian, so you're in a different situation. But as an American, as you get older, and again, I'm 64, healthcare becomes really important. And in the U.S., when I lived in Hawaii, we're paying like $1,000 a month for really crappy insurance, and that's just our monthly deductible, right? And then it was still bad insurance, right? And I lived on an island where if you had a heart attack, thankfully I never had that problem, they actually have to fly you in a helicopter to Oahu because they don't have any facilities on island to operate on your heart, right? So, I mean, it was just like, it wasn't a really good place to grow old. And so for me, the excellent Japanese healthcare, in addition to, it's a great place to age. They're on the forefront of aging because they're the oldest population. So those were as you were talking, those are kind of the general thoughts that popped into my head. And but good morning, Yuka. Thanks for coming up on stage too. But Colin, any thoughts on that?
So I actually, Tim, you raised a really good point. Canadian healthcare isn't great. I've realized that actually coming back now that it's kind of like a myth that's been purported a lot around the world, and the wait lists and stuff that we have for our public healthcare they're growing, and they're a concern. Like I told you and Maya before, I came back to Canada 6 years ago now to basically take care of my elderly parents. And I've seen firsthand how the elderly are really cared for here, or frankly cared for and ignored. And they're very lonely. There's a lot of loneliness here with elderly people. There's not the greatest, it's not the greatest infrastructure for people that, can't drive themselves around, have other mobility issues, the weather, the climate. There's a whole variety of reasons, but you raised some really good points about growing old, is going to happen to all of us, but why wouldn't we want to have the best possible world to do it in? And I agree with you. I think Japan, it's going to be at the forefront of aging. I know right now I'm kind of involved with an age tech company that's looking at a variety of different ways to support people, and Japan is the number one market for that. But there's other things where, when I came back to Canada, I kind of thought, sort of similar to what you said about old friends in Japan, I thought, oh man, I get to go back to my hometown and I get to connect with my, all my pals again. And we almost never see each other. And I'm in the middle of, I told you guys, I guess at another time, I'm in the middle of writing a book that's only taken 10 years. But as I'm trying to do it, one of the things that I was being a nerd about was I was looking at the type of friends that I made when I've lived in, now 7 different countries. And some of the closest, best friendships I have are still the ones I made in Japan. And they're split between my Japanese friends and my foreign friends. And the funny thing is that we had virtually nothing in common, but we have this really close connection on some pretty specific things. And the friends that I have from other places where we had lots of things in common, not so close. So I wonder if part of it is the setting where we met and, the time maybe, but I have they're kind of spread around a lot of different areas, from, work to first friends I met when I landed in the country to a variety of other stuff. And I think there's just a uniqueness about Japan that kind of made them richer. And I really want to get back to that. So I like what you said. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that you mentioned that resonate with me on this, why return to Japan? Well, for all of these reasons and more. Yeah,
and those are, I like also the point you made. You went back to Canada and you thought you were going to reconnect with old friends. I feel like my old friends, childhood friends in Chicago, have no clue about the kind of person I become. And this is true about anybody who goes to a foreign country. You expand as a person, you change, your points of view change. And so it's very difficult to talk to them on a level where they really get you. They really understand you. But my friends in Japan, both Japanese and non-Japanese, we can talk on a really deep level. If I sit down and have a drink with Frank, which I've had, we can talk about Japan-specific things, and it just resonates. We can make observations that we all get. And the same with Maya, and with you, And so having those kind of friends that can understand to a degree both worlds is really valuable to me.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. And I'd actually add one other thing. We all have these, friends from Japan, right? And I would probably put most of them in one bucket where Japan was like the only other country that they'd ever lived in. So they kind of, their perspective is either, well, it's home where I grew up and I'm now back again, or it's Japan where I spent my 3-5 whatever years. And I think I'm kind of unique. I may not be, given how diverse our audience is, but like I moved from Japan straight to the UK. Met my wife, 9 months before we left Japan, got married, all excited, went off to the UK to go back to school. I lived in the UK for 11 years. And now London's just as much of a microcosm of the world as anywhere else, if not more so. But when I talk to my friends that I made in London who are from all over the place, there's very few things about London or about the UK that bind us. So there's, we worked in the same company or we went to the same school or whatever. And there's this whole crazy diversity of the amount of people that we could meet when we were there. But there's just a handful of them that I actually stay in touch with. And funnily, two of the handful are guys that I met in Japan that all three of us went back to the UK or went to the UK. So when you said that thing about like the commonality we have in Japan that we can talk about and laugh about and nod along and know exactly what the other guy or gal is getting at, it's such a unique thing that it's probably as much of a magnet as the whole, maybe it's nostalgia or work opportunities or growing old and gracefully, that I'm kind of looking forward to, and I'm really excited to see. And I'm also aware though that, hey, you know what, when I go back to Japan, I might not live back in Kanazawa where I spent most of my time. And I may have to go to a new city like Tokyo that I didn't really spend much time in, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to bump into other people where there's that one or two things that really connect us, and all of the rest of it is irrelevant. Where they're from, the language they speak, whatever else, and it's just such a rich connection that it's a really attractive thing for me.
Well, I'm excited for you, Yuka. You've been quietly waiting in the wings. Good morning, or good.
Yeah, thank you. Don't you know that I'm known for my patience? No, I'm not.
Yes.
Anyway,
Hi, Yuka.
Hi, Colin. A very interesting topic, and so I don't know where to begin. I have so many questions. Just as an FYI, I'm Japanese. You can tell by my accent, but I come to the US to go to school and ended up meeting with my hubby. So I'm living in like a 3-4 months of a year. I spent in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so I know the Canadian winter. And then but then I'm currently in California. So and then it's so interesting. I used to work for like 10 years, Royal Bank of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Canadians, to me, okay, again, correct me if I'm wrong, they're more consensus driven as Japanese are compared to, the US cohorts. So I know that the Tim is not a Canadian, but being Canadian, do you think it would be easier just to get used to many Japanese quirkiness? I don't know what the Japanese ways. What do you think?
No, you make a good point. I used to, and I mean, thankfully my wife's in a different room because I'm sure I would hear about it later. But I used to hear, I used to hear, and then I kind of created my own theory. So forgive me for anyone who pokes a hole in the theory, but please do. I used to think that like why are there so many? At least my circle, I saw Canadian and Japanese couples, right? I saw these Canadian guys predominantly and Japanese women, and like why is it fairly successful? I didn't see a whole lot of non-successful examples. So my as Tim knows, as an anthropologist, my focus here isn't like thousands of people, it's like dozens. But the idea there was like we're kind of ingrained in Canada with this whole like start a sentence with I'm sorry, even if you're not and you haven't done anything wrong. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, but, or I'm sorry this. And there's a bit of a, and Tim again can correct me if I'm wrong with this, but there's a thing where whenever I was asked when I was in Japan about, what's the difference between Americans and Canadians? And okay, there is and there isn't, right? We like the same kind of sports. There's sort of commonalities in the way we speak or the words we use, same kind of geography, that sort of stuff. But the one thing that I always remembered was Canadians, there's like a way of talking, like we wait for gaps. So when we speak, you say what you want to say, and then there's a pause. And if no one fills the pause, then I continue because I take that as acceptance that people agree with what I'm saying or it's not ridiculously over the top wrong. So I keep going. If someone wants to speak, then they jump in the gap that I just made. My experience with some Americans, and obviously not all, was sort of like the person who was the most forceful or the loudest was the one that got heard, and people often talked over each other. I also noticed this when I was in Japan, right? There's a lot of unspoken silences, which people are okay with. They leave gaps between things. Okay, arguments get heated and people all talk at the same time, but that's sort of common around the world. So I don't know, Yuka, if that's really answering your question, but I think there's a similarity there in the way, like, language is a really good indicator of sort of personality, cultural values, and sort of things. So I think there was a similarity there that kind of allows people to think and to interact on like a common, comfortable way. And your comment about consensus, I don't know if our trucker convoy really conveyed that, but there's a little more of a rift appearing in Canadian society. But I think generally speaking, yeah, people don't like to rock the boat. They like consensus. They just want to move ahead and get things done instead of argue about them. So I don't know. Is that answering what you were saying?
Yeah. And then like it's so funny because I used to start my conversation with my boss. Like I poke my head into his office and say, "Hey, I'm sorry." And in the starting conversation, even though it's nothing to do with my apologies, and my boss used to say, "Don't ever start conversation with you're sorry," because people may lose the confidence in you.
Yep.
I said, okay. And then I think I do less and less, but sometimes I still do. It's kind of old habit, die hard. What's the expression? But anyway, I have a love and hate relationship with Japan because I think, because I have a high expectation for the country.
Yeah.
Maybe, but then but do you think that a Japanese tend not to talk to a stranger? Because I just ask him because we were talking about this because American, like you said, they're more chatty. Like in the elevator, we don't like silence. That's why we talk to a stranger. But in Japan, if I start talking to a stranger, people think, "Oh my God, what's wrong with her?"
I would agree with you. I think if I maybe go back a little bit before then, the love, I wanted to talk about the love and hate that you mentioned for Japan, because I think it's a really important topic. So, and this will be a little bit of a tiny little personal segue, but so my wife and I, she's from Kyoto. I met her when I was in Japan. Like I speak Japanese. That's how we communicate most of the time. Her English is fantastic. There's no reason why we don't. It's just common for us to use Japanese. We lived in the UK for a long time, 11 years. And when we got to be like the 11-year mark, we kind of said, look, we spend every waking moment on every vacation traveling to visit family in Canada or family in Japan. So we don't really, in my personal view, we don't really have a vacation. Visiting family is great, but it's never a holiday. So why don't we, let's pick one. Let's pick a country. Which one are we going to live in? And then we can use half of our vacation for fun and the other half for visiting the family on the other side of the world. And I was all for let's go back to Japan, which is one of the reasons why we have this topic today. My wife adamantly no. And we were, well, what's wrong with it? Because when I listen to her speak, she has this love and hate for her own country. She loves the food. She misses a lot of the media, like the entertainment side of it. She misses, onsens and this and that and everything else. But then there's this very clear line. And when it gets into the hate part of it, it's, yes, but I'm a trained international accountant. I'm not going to go back to Japan and just because I'm a mom have to work at a grocery store as a teller, or have someone worried that I'm not going to be able to spend the right amount of time at work because I have children and because I'm a mom, it's my duty to take care of them. Like there's a lot of those cultural tenets that really grate her the wrong way. So there's certainly a love and a hate there, and I think mine is mostly, as I kind of said before, like a nostalgic part where there's maybe more love than there is reality on the things that I didn't like. And there certainly were things that I didn't like. And one of the things I didn't like, you raised, that strangers don't want to talk to me. They won't sit beside me in public transportation sometimes. They'll look away when you're walking down the street. And I know I said this when Tim and Maya and I were talking before. I kind of created this nerdy graph where I plotted out how people would learning Japanese, how welcome I was in society, and then at a certain point you've learned too much and people think you're weird. And I think there's you made a really good point about like the interacting with those you don't know in public, and I would certainly say that's been my experience. But it's also been very different in different scenarios. So, but I think we've got an interesting comment that I think Seiji wants to make a comment here. Go ahead, Seiji.
Hi, sorry, I'm still trying to figure out how to use Clubhouse.
You and me too, buddy.
So fascinating conversation, and I can relate to a lot of the things that you talked about, Colin, and Yuka-san too. So like Tim, I'm from Chicago, born and raised, which makes me Japanese American. And I too spent the early years of my professional career. In fact, my first job out of college was at a Japanese company in Tokyo. And so, and I totally understand the whole love and hate thing about Japan. My wife is also Japanese. We lived in the United States for about almost 30 years, I guess. And as much as she loved Japan, just the same things that you said, Colin. She loves the food. She misses a lot of the cultural interaction, stuff like that. She would probably never want to go back and live in Japan. But Colin, I guess the reason why I raised my hand is because, Colin, you were saying you had made comments at the beginning about how you feel Japan needs people who are bilingual, bicultural, or multicultural to kind of help Japan stay in the forefront of the world economy. And I was hoping you could expand on that a little bit more as a Japanese American who speaks Japanese well, but not nearly at a professional level, not like Tim, for example, or Maya. How would somebody who's not perfectly bilingual be able to contribute to the things that you're talking about in terms of helping Japan stay on the forefront of the world economy?
Seiji, I think that's a great question. And it's one that I'm asking myself on a daily basis because as lovely and fluent as I think my Japanese is, I'm sure it's not anywhere near what it would need to be in the eyes of some people. But if I can elaborate a little bit on what I was saying before, briefly before, I think Japan needs an intermediate step. And so what I mean by that is, earlier on in my career, I worked in financial services, and I had the luck and the luxury to work for Meiji Yasuda Life, Meiji Yasuda Seimei, but overseas. I worked in their London office and ran research and a lot of things for their European operations. And so what we would see is, this, as we're all probably very aware, this sort of 3-year cycle where they'd send some young person overseas, they'd get a little bit of exposure, and they'd go back to Japan. But what I also noticed over time, and this was like 2007 to 2014, the younger people wanting to go overseas was dropping off like crazy. There was not as much of an interest. There used to be a really heated competition to get those coveted, New York, London, Paris, Hong Kong positions. And there were a few years where we couldn't even attract anybody to come to our Meiji Yasuda Seimei office in downtown London. And so I kind of started doing a little bit of research into this. And I found out that there really wasn't as much of a desire as we thought for younger professionals to go and do that little stint overseas because they thought they were going to get either forgotten about or, left out, or heaven forbid their relationships with that almighty HR department were going to kind of fade. And then when and if they ever went back, they weren't going to be on a fast track to a high paying job. So that kind of carried over to a couple of other places I worked, and specifically as a consultant with Japanese companies looking to go overseas, and the reverse, foreign companies wanting to go to Japan. And when I was working similarly with a North American bank, they were constantly doing the same thing. They would send over these up and coming, mostly guys, but at times women, give them a job in Japan that was really more of a post where they didn't have a whole lot of responsibility. 3 years, you did your overseas stint, go back to New York and get on the fast track to a high level job. And there was this constant gap in the middle where, like you're saying, Seiji, my Japanese, or in their case Japanese, and for the Japanese staff coming to us in London, their English, it's not good enough. We either need to be like fluent or don't bother going at all. And I really think that there's an interim step, that gap that I was talking about, where they still, regardless if I can do a fluent presentation in front of a board of directors, there's still an important group that is necessary in middle management or just a bit above, where you can communicate, but you don't need to be perfect. And people need to start learning that that's okay. And that's actually just as valuable as someone having EQ, but not having any experience in a variety of industries and disciplines. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Seiji, and I hope I'm answering your question, is I think for people like yourself and me, the interest and the experience should trump being fluent in a language. And I'm noticing from recruiters now, when they talk to me about jobs, they don't say, well, you don't need any, it's not important, it's a high level one, someone will translate for you, or interpret for you, or, oh no, yes, you have to have your JLPT N1 or you can't get a job. They're looking for people in the middle because it's the ability to communicate as well as those other things that far outweigh just focusing solely on the language bit that frankly isn't really that necessary, as you've learned in the States and so have I, dealing with a lot of people that aren't born and raised where we are, but still do a heck of a good job. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I guess it really is just a matter of finding people who think like that, and trying to figure out where you might fit in and where you might be able to contribute. But I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think I missed that other interim step, Seiji. We'll go to Tim though. Go ahead.
No, I have like a really strong opinion about the language aspect. And first of all, I am not even close to perfectly bilingual. And what does fluency mean? To me, it just means you can carry on a conversation. You understand what they're saying. Your grammar isn't necessarily perfect. Your pronunciation isn't necessarily perfect, but they understand you, right? And I was always pushing the envelope. I would give seminars. I could do an 8-hour seminar in Japanese and ad lib, but it wasn't perfect. But that really was beside the point. I was using what I know as a tool to be persuasive, to again, on a daily level, to develop relationships of trust. And I think it's the ability to use the language, however good you can speak, you can speak it, as a tool to develop trusting relationships, where communication is possible. So I really, so I agree with everything you said, Colin. And I think there's so much to contribute that is way beyond language. In my case, it was the intersection between management in a cross-cultural setting and cultural anthropology. It was like where those two, that was my niche. And it was
You followed me right there, man. You beat me to the punch with anthropology, Tim. I was going to say to you and to Seiji as well, like I get asked all the time, are you fluent in Japanese? And I always bring it back to a cultural component. So fluency is what? Well, fluency for me is, are you able to tell a joke? And if you can tell a joke and get people to laugh, then that means you understand something very central to every culture, which is humor. And it's based on context. It's based on reading the audience. It's based on delivery, right? And it's based on your ability to kind of be a little bit vulnerable in front of a group of people, usually. So, Seiji, to your point about like the fluency, like how important is it to be fluent or not? I guess having grown up as a Japanese American and with a Japanese wife, there is a wealth of cultural knowledge that you have that will automatically override any linguistic stumbles that you might have. So the ability to utilize that is really important. And to the other question you asked about finding a company that's willing to maybe say, oh, we don't need this requirement. Instead, we like the personality of the person or their reasons for wanting to come here and make it their home again. It's actually changing, and it's changing quite quickly. There's a lot of technology companies, even ones set up by younger Japanese entrepreneurs, where they're just saying, look, I don't care if the guy studied at KO and has a degree in Japanese and all of the certifications. Does he understand business? Can he connect us with important people around the world that will want to use our service or our product? Right. And if you can do that, I think you're made in the shade.
Okay. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I always like, and Maya and Tim have heard me say this joke before, is that, when people say, do you speak Japanese? I always say, well, I can drink beer in Japanese, which I guess is the English joke that I like to use. I guess I got to come up with some Japanese jokes then.
Japanese jokes, I'm a self-deprecating type. So I always tell a story about how I screwed up or, how I mispronounced the word, or I even go back to like little children's, like, how do you know this children's song or whatever? But like, it kind of goes to the idea I was saying before about vulnerability, right? I think whenever I engage with Japanese people, whether they're seasoned or not, there's a little bit of, I'm not doing that right. Or, even Yuka, I'd say to you, your English is fantastic. You're doing this whole podcast in English. There's no reason to say that or insinuate that it's not as great as everyone's other ability to speak that language in Japanese. But your ability to say, hey, you know what? This is me, warts and all. I'm going to make some mistakes. Are you cool with that or not? And if you aren't, there's 7 billion other people on earth I can talk to. So that's kind of my attitude.
Yeah, and if you don't have that attitude, good luck learning a foreign language. You have to have it to put yourself out there to improve. I did want to make one quick point about Sage, and then Maya, you can jump in. But the one thing that's unfair about all of this is that let's just assume Seiji and I speak exactly the same level of Japanese, just for fun, just for argument's sake, and we're speaking to Japanese folks. The Japanese are going to say, "Wow, Tim's Japanese is great," and they're going to say, "What's wrong with Seiji?" And the reason they're going to say that is because they look at you and they expect you by default to be completely perfectly fluent like a Japanese person, and I know this because I have lots of Japanese American friends who get treated much more harshly than I do, because Japanese look at my face, blue eyes, and they cut me slack. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know, Seiji, is that an accurate assessment of your situation?
Well, I guess I guess I'm fortunate in that I speak Japanese pretty well and well enough. Let's put it that way, to have conversations and kind of like the joke that I said. I can sit around with a bunch of people and have conversations about sports or politics or what's going on in the media. And having grown up with two parents that were from Japan, a lot of people tell me my Japanese, I don't have an accent when I speak Japanese. So I guess I'm lucky in that respect, because I like you, Tim, I do know Japanese Americans who do speak with an accent, and they kind of don't get treated as well as I do. But I guess for me, it's more of a professional concern. But I think Colin's correct. I should probably just stop worrying about it, and just focus on the things that I do well, and just throw in the Japanese as really more of a bonus.
Yeah. So when I saw this topic, I was really looking forward to joining, this room, because, the setting the language issue aside, and I think language issues is going to be solved in the area of metaverse. I don't know when, but eventually. And, cultural, it's just a matter of time of getting used to. But one major hurdle for me to go back to Japan is, that all cultures have pros and cons, and then pros can be cons for somebody. So I am very antisocial. And then I love this remote working arrangement. It really suits me well. And then, I haven't been to Japan for a while. When I go to Japan, I have to worry about even how to dress, because there is the social role that I have to play. Otherwise, people, speak badly behind my parents' back. So that's the thing that I have to, be concerned with. Here, nobody cares how I dress. Nobody cares about the color of my hair even. So that sort of social expectation that I have to meet, it's really giving me a pause before I go back. And again, it may be different for you guys. But so how do you feel? Like, there is some expectation people place on you?
Yeah, I like your I shouldn't say like, because I agree with you and I think it's sad. But Yuka, everything that you've said has already been echoed to me by my wife, and like, she's now had a chance to live in 6 other countries with me, including Japan. Well, Japan plus the 6 other ones. So she's seen that everywhere else. Hey, I can walk around in London and no one cares what my hair color is, or if I'm going to do this kind of work or not do this kind of work, or participate in this group or not. And I've tried to show her, even in Canada, where it seems like that's the case, there is still a lot of like social rules and requirements. Like, I have to be part of our neighborhood association. I have to be on the PTA of our kids' school. And a lot of those jobs are pushed to me because this is, my home country. So it's easier for me to do it. But I do agree with you. I don't think it's the same experience for her in Japan as it is for me in Canada. And as much as I would like to believe that I could help pick up some of the requirements and expectations if we were to move back to Japan, I think she probably does have, almost certainly does have more expectations of her, particularly having kids. So trying to balance being a professional woman and having children and, taking care of them the way people expect. And I would add maybe one more comment before I'm quiet on this, which is, and I've heard this from friends, and I don't think it's entirely fair, because I don't think they're taking enough of what their partner is saying to heart. But it's easy for me to say, oh yeah, honey, don't worry about that kinjo konbang or kobang or whatever it is, or don't worry about this, or who cares if you don't make the right kind of lunch for the boys when they go to school, and don't worry about people talking behind your back and that. But it can be so impactful in a negative way, and it can feel, you can be very isolated very quickly for putting one little foot wrong. Where for me to say that, yeah, I mean, people expect me not to participate or be a little bit, odd, or when someone comes around asking me for something, I can just pretend that I don't understand and close the door on them, and they'll just say, oh yeah, he's a foreigner, of course he doesn't know. So I think to your point, yeah, like it's going to be, I know my wife and I, when we talk about, hey, like maybe we would want to move back to Japan, where would we go? She does not pick big cities. She wants to go buy an Akiya somewhere and fix it up, and she wants to do her own thing. And a lot of that is staying away from all of that noise, which I think when I ask her about it, it's like, are you okay with being a little isolated? Like she's a far more sociable person than I am in some instances. So I take all of your points to heart, and I'd ask maybe Maya and Tim, Seiji, and others, if there are any other female listeners we have, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, everything everybody said echoed exactly what my wife said when we went back to the U.S. in 1987, and it was a 2-year stint. I was employed in a Japanese company in Japan, and they sent me as a shikoshain. And again, it was just a 2-year contract. After 2 years, my wife said, you can go back to Japan. I'm staying. I love it here. I don't have to worry about what your boss's wife thinks of me. I don't have to worry about all the Gideon that comes along with all the chugen, the seibo, and you get a gift. Now you got to give them one of equal value. And what she was describing is what I call the Japanese social pressure cooker. And as foreigners, we don't live in that pressure cooker. And as you said, Colin, it's easy for us outside the pressure cooker to say to our Japanese spouse, "Oh, don't worry about what those people think about you." Yeah, we don't live in that. And so in some ways, and this is probably controversial to some people, but I think for a foreigner like me, it's easier for me to live in Japan than it is for a Japanese native, because there's greater expectations put on them and they cut us a lot more slack.
Yeah, I agree. And that's like what I said earlier about the bubble, right? I get to be in a bubble as and when I want. I can leave it. I can go back in it. No one seems to think twice about it. But yeah, to your point, like when I first brought up, like, hey, let's move back to Japan a couple of years ago, that was the first time I ever saw my wife physically put her foot down and then have to like take a moment and say, okay, can you lay it out for me? And it was a 3-hour conversation. So there was a lot there that I wasn't in tune with. And I think, yeah, it's going to be a big consideration, exactly to the things you said, Tim, as well as you, Yuka.
Yeah, there is really good, so many good things about Japan too. So sort of like I have to balance again the pros and cons, and especially Timothy, when you said about the healthcare cost, that is the great advantage Japan has over U.S. But I know the Canadian the healthcare system too, but I think it's Japan. It's probably better. So
yeah, I would. I mean, I've been unfortunately I've been sick in both, and I think they're relatively similar. But my issue in Canada, and just in a nutshell, is the Canadian medical system is supposed to be standard across the country, but it really only applies to big centers where you can get everything done for you and there's enough support. I live in a second-tier city, and so I'm always like the second or third choice. And to Tim, when he was talking about flying in a helicopter if you had a heart attack, fortunately, I've never had a heart attack. Unfortunately, I've never been in a helicopter, but I wouldn't want to mix those two together. And similar in Canada, if there was a big problem, I've got hours to travel to get to somewhere where I can get coverage or at least the right kind of care. And that isn't the case in a lot, not all, but in a lot of Japan. So I think Yuka, yeah, like in the US, which I've never had to experience paying those crazy health insurance premiums. I don't know how people do it. I did like the system they had in Singapore, which is a mixture of both. They have general healthcare for everyone that is very basic. And then the onus is on you to top up what you want and how private you want to get. But that's a system that's been built over 50 years. So just a different perspective.
I mean, my mother-in-law just spent $20,000 to replace a bridge. 20,000. So like maybe you can buy a used car for that price, right? But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that's awful. I'm sorry to hear that. That's terrible.
Yeah, that's awful. And I think that at the end of the day, because Colin, as you said, we are all going to get old. At the end of the day, it is a lot about yes, a lot about the healthcare system. But I also, while I was listening to you all, I was also thinking that in addition to the language and in addition to your language ability, of course, I think that it is important to be if not fluent, at least conversive in Japanese. If you live and work here, it helps. But what helps much more than that is the cultural match and also the way, your ability to understand how the culture works. Because a lot of people who come here for a short period of time, or let's say in the middle term for 5 or 6 years, they don't get out of their own bubble. And they usually live on stereotypes, and they assess the environment based on those stereotypes which they had before they came to the country. And I think that the ability to get out of that personal bubble and to reach out to try to understand how different everything is here and why it is different is very important too. And so, of course, it relates to emotional intelligence, it relates to cultural intelligence, it relates to many other things. And it is equally important, I believe, to your ability to speak and understand Japanese to a certain extent.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good comment, because there was I kept looking back at the title, and I'm making sure that we stay on task and we do focus on returning to Japan and everything, in and around language proficiency and all those important things. But one of the things that you raised, well, I mean, in addition to emotional and cultural intelligence, is I think, like, when you're a foreigner, and I can only speak as a foreigner in Japan, but when you're a foreigner in Japan, you kind of have, like, as we would say in French, carte blanche. You have this, like, hey, what am I interested in? Like, what can I take the opportunity to learn and have absolutely no strings and expectations and just explore that kind of stuff. An example that I have is, I lived in Sojiji in northern Ishikawa Prefecture, which is one of the oldest Zen monasteries in Western Japan, for 6 months, because for legal reasons I won't get into about visas. But on the flip side, I was really interested in Zen meditation, and I wanted to experience that, and I wanted to learn about it, firsthand. One of the things that, I'd never been able to do that anywhere else. It's very specific to Japan and so on and so forth. But it's kind of like, when I meet people who have really kind of got or meshed with Japan, they have some kind of specific Japanese cultural, religious, social, whatever thing that they've kind of got their hooks into. And that has kept them going for a long time. And if I maybe bring it back to the, why does Japan need us, people like us? One of the best ways for Japan's amazing culture, history, and everything else to get out is when there's a foreigner that kind of embraces it, and then they go and share it with the rest of the world. And I've seen that firsthand in a whole variety of different areas. And it really helps go beyond the traditional way of, we send our own experts out and they teach people how to do it. There's almost like this bridging aspect to how people can who have no connection with Japan whatsoever and think it's so far away from them and so different, they can use this intermediary to be able to understand a little bit about the country, which can only benefit both sides. So, I mean, yeah, Maya, I love the comments that you made about that. And that kind of resonated with me in this different way about why Japan needs us and why we need it.
Yes, I don't know whether, of course, I'm not a native English speaker, but it sounds to me like grassroots diplomacy. So when ordinary people come here and they understand how the country works, what the beauty of the culture and the people here is, and they go back home and they become ambassadors. So it's really, I wish there were more people, more foreigners doing this. Hopefully there will be, of course, after the pandemic is over, because we know that the Japanese government is looking for more foreigners to work here in Japan. And when I say foreigners, it's not only people from Asia and other Asian countries, it's also people from all over the world. And I have noticed one trend here in Japan, that nowadays, even though there are fewer younger people who go overseas to study in foreign universities, I have met more young people speaking English and other foreign languages than 20 years ago. So this is a very interesting trend, and I believe that it will increase. Of course, it will become also more. The foreign language proficiency will become even more widely spread here. I'm saying this because of what I'm observing, and of course, it is a very slow trend, but still, it is a very good one, and it is here. It is present.
Maya, it's really interesting. I'd like to just suggest that maybe that could be a topic for a room as well at some point.
I second that, Seiji. I think that's great. Sorry, go ahead. You could beat me to it. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea.
Thank you for the idea, actually, because I was just talking about the trend and I never thought of making it a topic for a future room, but it's indeed a great idea. So we'll be thinking about that. So, and we will let you know, of course, when the room will be scheduled and so on. Well, Colin, we're just a few minutes past 9 o'clock. This is the time when we wrap up the room. So thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. So if you have anything in conclusion, please go ahead and let us know.
Thank you. I found this really, I try to live by a few very simple phrases. And one of them is, I try to listen more than I talk. I'm not always successful, but I kind of know what I'm going to say. So it's better to listen to hear some different perspectives. And I know certainly Tim and you, Maya, have provided me with some, and Seiji and Yuka, I really appreciate your views as well, because it's helped round out what I'm thinking. I would say I still wholeheartedly believe that there's more pros than cons in returning to Japan, both for the people themselves as well as for the country. There's certainly a lot of work that needs to be done. I know one of the reasons why I left in the past was for my own development, but I kind of don't see myself as a vigilante pushing people to change. I was sort of hoping others would do it, but it's a little bit slower than I would have expected, having left Japan in 2003. So maybe now is the time to ramp it up. We'll see. But I think, like everyone, we've got to figure out our own reasons for wanting to go back or not. I think my wife is on the fence. I know she's saying 6 months there and 6 months somewhere else. That just means I got to get another job to be able to pay for it. But I really love the topic. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. And please reach out if you'd like to discuss this or anything else in the future. Thanks again, Tim and Maya.
Thank you, Colin. And we're certainly going to continue this conversation in the future. So hopefully you'll stay with us.
And Maya, you just echoed what I was going to say. I have a page full of notes of things that we could talk about in the future. So hopefully we can get Colin back, because I think this is one of those discussions that could go in a lot of really interesting directions.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, Tim, for this. And Seiji and Yuka, thank you very much for being part of this discussion. Your input has been great, very much appreciated. And we're looking forward to having you back here again next week, or when your schedule permits, of course. So many thanks to everybody in the audience. We're having these rooms thanks to you, because you come to listen to them and also to participate in the conversations. Your input is valued very much. And we hope that we'll continue to have you here. Of course, if you think that some of these discussions are interesting, or maybe interesting to your friends as well, tell your friends about them. They are uploaded on YouTube, so they can be listened to there a week after the room has taken place. So that's it for today. Thank you very much again for staying with us, even on a Thursday morning. And we're looking forward to having you again here. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next week on Thursday at 8 a.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at JapanExpertInsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make the best of the day. See you.